Hashtag they push the quiet man. One word stopped them cold. The observation deck of Station Kepler. 7 hummed with the usual morning chatter of a dozen different species. Coffee steamed from human mugs, while Zephyrian nutrition cubes dissolved in bowls of amber liquid. The scent of sulfur wafted from the Corvin delegation's breakfast, mixing with the sweet floral aroma that followed the luminari wherever they went. Marcus Chun sat alone at his usual table near the massive viewport, watching the traffic flow around the station. Cargo haulers, diplomatic vessels, and mining ships moved in careful patterns, their navigation lights blinking against the star-scattered darkness. He'd been sitting there every morning for 3 years, ever since his assignment as the human liaison to the Galactic Trade Consortium. 3 years of watching, listening, and keeping his mouth shut. The other species had learned to ignore him. The quiet human who never spoke unless directly addressed, who filed his reports on time, and who seemed content to fade into the background of galactic politics. They saw him as harmless, another example of humanity's tendency toward bureaucratic mediocrity. At the table behind him, Ambassador Thex Rin of the hegemony leaned forward, his 6 eyes gleaming with satisfaction. The human territories will make excellent mining colonies once we've relocated the populations, he said in his clicking, chittering voice. Their worlds are rich in trilithium, and the gravity wells are perfect for our extraction equipment. His companion, a tall Zephyrian with silver skin that rippled in the morning light, nodded thoughtfully. The relocation shouldn't be difficult. Humans are remarkably compliant when faced with superior force. We've seen it before on the Rim worlds. Marcus's coffee cup remained steady in his hands, though his knuckles had gone white. He continued staring out the viewport, his reflection ghost-like in the reinforced glass. Just another morning. Just another conversation about the systematic dismantling of human civilization. The beauty of it, Thex Rin continued, warming to his topic, is that we don't even need to use force. Economic pressure will suffice. Cut off their trade routes, impose tariffs on their exports, and they'll beg us to take their worlds. The Galactic Council has already approved the preliminary frameworks. A Corvin delegate shuffled past their table, her crystalline shell catching the light. What of their military? She asked, her voice like grinding stone. Surely they'll resist. Thex Rin's mandibles clicked in what passed for laughter among his kind. Human military? They've been at peace for 60 years. Their fleet couldn't stop a merchant convoy, let alone a proper military force. They've grown soft, content to hide behind their little bubble of space, while real civilizations shape the galaxy. The Zephyrian's head turned slightly, and Marcus felt those alien eyes studying his reflection in the window. Speaking of humans, the silver-skinned delegate said quietly, "There's one right here. Do you think he understands what we're discussing?" "Doubtful," Thex Rin replied without lowering his voice. "Look at him. 3 years on this station, and I've never heard him say more than yes, sir, or the report will be filed by end of cycle." Typical human, all the spine of a Kepler slug. Marcus took another sip of his coffee. It had gone cold, but he barely noticed. His mind was elsewhere, calculating. 3 years of sitting at this table. 3 years of listening to conversations like this one. 3 years of watching the slow strangulation of human space while filing reports that disappeared into bureaucratic black holes. The Luminari representative at the next table overchimed in, her crystalline voice like wind through metal strings. "Perhaps we should be more circumspect. Even the quietest waters can hide dangerous currents." Dangerous? Thex Rin's clicking grew more pronounced. From them, the humans had their chance to join the greater galactic community as equals. Instead, they chose isolation, chose to play with their little colonies while the real powers carved up the universe. Now they'll learn what irrelevance costs. Marcus set down his cup with deliberate care. In the viewport's reflection, he could see the entire table behind him. Thex Rin still lounging in his chair, mandibles clicking with amusement. The Zephyrian studying Marcus with those silver eyes. The Corvin delegate leaning forward with interest. The Luminari representative glowing faintly with what might have been concern. "The human fleet," he said without turning around, his voice quiet but carrying clearly in the morning air, "is not what you think it is." The conversation behind him stopped immediately. The general chatter of the observation deck seemed to dim, as if the station itself was holding its breath. "Excuse me." Thexrin's voice had lost its casual amusement. Marcus turned slowly in his chair, his movements deliberate and unhurried. When his eyes met Thexrin's sixfold gaze, there was something there that hadn't been present for 3 years. Something that made the hegemony ambassador's mandibles stop clicking. I said, Marcus repeated, his voice still quiet, but somehow filling the space around them. The human fleet is not what you think it is. The Zephyrian leaned back in his chair, silver skin rippling with what might have been unease. And what exactly do you think you know about Galactic Military Affairs Liaison? Marcus smiled. It was not a particularly warm expression. I know that you've been watching our commercial vessels and calling them our fleet. I know that you've been tracking our civilian shipping and assuming it represents our military capacity. I know that for 3 years, I've been sitting here listening to all of you make the same fundamental error, which is, the Corvin delegate's voice had taken on a sharper edge. You think we've been hiding from you? Marcus stood slowly, his coffee forgotten on the table. You think we've been cowering in our little bubble of space because we're afraid, because we're weak. The Luminari representative's glow had shifted from peaceful blue to something approaching amber warning. And you're saying that's not the case? Marcus looked around the observation deck, taking in the dozens of alien faces now turned toward their conversation. Representatives from 100 worlds, all part of the vast galactic community that had been slowly, systematically cutting humanity out of its own future. No, he said simply. We haven't been hiding from you. We've been hiding from ourselves. The silence stretched, broken only by the distant hum of the station's engines and the soft whisper of the life support systems. Outside the viewport, a human cargo hauler drifted past, its hull scarred and functional, seemingly insignificant next to the sleek vessels of the other species. What does that mean? Thexrin demanded, his voice no longer casual. Marcus walked to the viewport, placing his palm against the cool surface. The cargo hauler was gone now, lost in the traffic patterns that surrounded the station like a vast mechanical dance. It means, he said without turning around, that you're about to find out why we've spent 60 years telling ourselves we were pacifists. Why we spent 6 decades convincing ourselves that we'd outgrown the need for war. Why we've worked so hard to forget what we're capable of when we stop pretending to be civilized. He turned back to face the room, and every alien present felt something cold settle in their stomachs. The quiet human liaison was gone. What stood before them now was something older, something that remembered humanity's true nature. You want to take our worlds? Marcus continued, his voice still soft but carrying clearly through the sudden stillness. You want to relocate our populations. You want to strip mine our colonies and reduce us to footnotes in galactic history. The Council has approved, Thexrin began. The Council, Marcus interrupted, has made a mistake. A very, very serious mistake. The observation deck felt suddenly smaller, as if the walls were closing in. The normal chatter of morning conversation had died completely, replaced by a tension that seemed to vibrate in the recycled air. You see, Marcus said, walking slowly back toward his table, there's something you need to understand about humans. Something that 60 years of peace made us forget about ourselves. Something we've been trying very hard not to remember. He stopped at his table and picked up his coffee cup, noting absently that his hand was perfectly steady. We're not civilized because we don't know how to fight, he said. We're civilized because we know exactly how good we are at it. The emergency session of the Galactic Trade Consortium convened exactly 6 hours after the incident in the observation deck. Word had spread through the station's diplomatic quarters like wildfire. The quiet human had finally spoken, and what he'd said had left even the most seasoned ambassadors unsettled. Ambassador Thexrin paced the length of the conference room, his 6 legs carrying him in agitated circles while his mandibles clicked rapidly. It was clearly a bluff, he insisted to the assembled delegates. Humans have been pacifists for 6 decades. Their military is a ceremonial force at best. Chun was simply trying to intimidate us with empty threats. The Zephyrian delegate, Veldar, remained motionless in his chair, but his silver skin continued to ripple with barely contained nervousness. The way he looked at us. I've seen that look before. My grandfather fought in the Arcturus campaigns. He described that same expression in the human soldiers just before they... Before they what? Demanded Corvin Representative Zixtal, her crystalline voice sharp with impatience. Before they did things that shouldn't have been possible, Veldar finished quietly. Fexrin's pacing intensified. Ancient history, propaganda, human military doctrine has been defensive for 60 years. They haven't even built a new warship class in 40 years. Their fleet consists of outdated patrol craft and converted civilian vessels. Then, explain the transmission logs, said a new voice from the room shadows. All heads turned as Intelligence Director Kethvar emerged from the corner where he'd been listening silently. The umbral was nearly invisible until he chose to be seen, his dark form seeming to absorb light rather than reflect it. What transmission logs? Fexrin's clicking stopped abruptly. Kethvar materialized a holographic display in the center of the table. These are encrypted communications intercepted from human space over the past 72 hours. The encryption is unusual. Our best cryptographers are calling it impossible. The hologram showed a cascade of data streams, flowing in patterns that seemed to twist and bend in ways that hurt to look at directly. The transmissions began exactly 18 minutes after Chen's statement in the observation deck. They've been increasing in frequency and complexity ever since. Luminari Delegate Solera's crystalline form pulsed with anxious yellow light. You think they're mobilizing? I think, Kethvar said slowly, that we've been watching the wrong things. We've been monitoring their merchant traffic, their civilian communications, their trade routes. But we never bother to look for military channels because we assume they didn't exist. Because they don't. Fexrin slammed a clawed appendage against the table. We have surveillance satellites throughout the outer systems. We have trade observers on every major human world. There are no military installations, no fleet formations, no visible preparations, Kethvar interrupted. But what if they don't need visible preparations? What if their entire approach to warfare is something we don't recognize? The room fell silent. Outside the conference chamber, Station Kepler 7 continued its normal operations, but there was an undercurrent of tension that seemed to affect every species present. Conversations in the corridors had grown quieter. Even in normally boisterous hegemony, trade delegations spoke in hushed tones. Veldar's skin had gone almost mirror-bright, a sign of extreme stress among his people. We should consider the possibility that Chun was telling the truth, that we fundamentally misunderstood human military capacity. Impossible, Fexrin repeated, but his voice lacked its earlier conviction. Is it? Solera's melodic voice carried harmonics of uncertainty. Consider their history. Humans went from primitive chemical rockets to faster-than-light travel in less than 2 centuries. They colonized 47 worlds in 30 years. They built this station, which still uses technology our best engineers can't fully replicate. Civilian achievements, Fexrin protested. Industrial capacity doesn't translate to military power. Kethvar's form shifted, becoming slightly more visible. Doesn't it? The humans were the only species to achieve FTL without external contact. Every other civilization was guided by those who came before, taught the basics, given the theoretical framework. Humans developed their jump drive technology in complete isolation. And their first successful FTL test, Veldar added quietly, destroyed a moon. An accident, Fexrin insisted. Was it? Kethvar's question hung in the air like a challenge. The official reports called it a containment failure. But the crater pattern suggests a controlled detonation. Perfect spherical blast, with radiation signatures that don't match any known weapon technology. Zixtal's crystalline form chimed with harmonics of unease. You're suggesting they developed weapons-grade FTL technology on their first attempt? I'm suggesting, Kethvar replied, that humans have a history of calling their weapons research something else. Their peaceful exploration of space involved more explosions than most wars. Their asteroid mining operations resulted in the complete destruction of 3 planetary systems. Accidentally, they claimed. The holographic display shifted, showing a star chart of human space. What had seemed like a sparse, defensively oriented territory now looked different in this new light. The spacing between colonies followed patterns that could be defensive positions. The trade routes formed overlapping networks that could serve as rapid deployment corridors. Even if that's true, Fexrin said, his voice smaller now, it doesn't matter. The Galactic Council has already voted. The The human territories are to be reorganized for optimal resource extraction. The decision is final. Then we'd better hope, said a new voice from the chamber's entrance, that we're all wrong about what humans are capable of. Everyone turned to see Marcus Chun standing in the doorway. He wasn't supposed to be there. The session was classified, restricted to senior delegates only. But somehow the quiet human liaison had walked past security, through locked doors, and into the most secure conference room on the station. How did you? Thexrin began. The same way I've been accessing your classified communications for 3 years, Marcus said calmly. The same way I've been monitoring your surveillance networks, reading your intelligence reports, and watching your military assessments of human space. The silence that followed was absolute. Even the station's background hum seemed to fade into nothingness. Marcus stepped into the room, and the door sealed behind him with a soft hiss. You've been wondering about those encrypted transmissions. You've been trying to break codes that your computers insist are mathematically impossible. You've been asking yourselves what humanity might be capable of if you've been wrong about us all this time. He moved to the center of the room, his presence somehow dominating despite his unremarkable appearance. Let me answer that question for you. Every human world has been connected to a single network for the past 60 years. Every human ship, every station, every settlement. We call it the neural web. Kethvar's form flickered with shock. That's impossible. We would have detected such a network. You've been detecting it, Marcus replied. You've been calling it our civilian communication grid. What you didn't realize is that there's no difference between civilian and military infrastructure in human space. Every merchant ship is a potential warship. Every mining station is a weapons platform. Every colony world is a fortress. The holographic display began showing new data streams, and suddenly, the patterns became clear. What they'd been seeing as trade traffic was actually the movement of a vast, interconnected war machine. What they'd interpreted as peaceful colonization was actually the establishment of a defensive network that spanned dozens of star systems. The neural web doesn't just connect our computers, Marcus continued. It connects our minds. Every human in space is part of it. Every decision, every plan, every tactical insight is shared instantly across our entire civilization. Veldar's skin had gone completely reflective now. A hive mind? No, Marcus said. Something far more dangerous. A civilization that can think as one when it chooses to, but still maintains individual creativity and adaptability. All the benefits of collective intelligence with none of the weaknesses. Thexrin's mandibles had stopped moving entirely. You're saying that your entire species is one organism when we need to be, Marcus confirmed. 47 worlds thinking as one mind. 300 million humans sharing every thought, every innovation, every tactical advantage. The room's occupants stared at him in growing horror as the implications became clear. Humanity hadn't been hiding from the galaxy. They'd been preparing for it. 60 years of apparent peace had been 60 years of evolution into something unprecedented. The Council's decision, Silera whispered, her light dimming to barely perceptible levels, will be met, Marcus said simply, with appropriate measures. As if summoned by his words, the station's communication system activated. A single word echoed through every speaker, in every language, understood by every species present. Va! The first reports came in exactly 7 hours after Marcus Chin spoke, that single word. Hegemony patrol fleets in 3 different systems had simply vanished. Not destroyed. There were no debris fields, no distress calls, no signs of battle. One moment they were there on long-range sensors, the next moment they were gone. Admiral Krethak of the Hegemony First Fleet stood before the tactical display in his flagship's command center, staring at the empty spaces where his patrol groups should have been. How does an entire fleet disappear without a trace? His intelligence officer, a nervous Zephyrian named Velkoth, manipulated the holographic controls with trembling fingers. Unknown, sir. The last transmissions from Patrol Group 7 were routine status reports. Then, nothing. Cloaking technology? Krethak suggested, though his voice carried no conviction. Negative, sir. We've run full spectrum scans. Gravitational analysis shows no mass signatures where the fleets should be. It's as if they never existed. On the secondary display, Similar reports scrolled past from across the galaxy. Corvin mining operations had gone silent. Zephyrian trade convoys had missed their scheduled check-ins. Even the Luminari's advanced sensor networks were reporting gaps, spaces where there should have been something, but now there was nothing. "Sir," the communications officer called out, "we're receiving a transmission from Station Kepler 7. It's unusual." Define unusual. The signal is coming from every transmitter on the station simultaneously. Every frequency, every communications array, even the emergency beacons, all broadcasting the same message. Krethak's scaled hide rippled with unease. "Show me." The main display flickered, and, suddenly, Marcus Chen's face filled the screen. But something was wrong with the image. His eyes seemed to track movement in the command center, as if he could see through the transmission. When he spoke, his voice came from every speaker in the ship simultaneously. "Admiral Krethak," Marcus said, and the Admiral's blood turned to ice. "By now you've noticed that your patrol fleets are missing. The Corvin have lost 17 mining stations. The Zephyrians are down 43 trade vessels. The Luminari sensor network has developed some interesting blind spots." The tactical officer looked up from his console, face pale. "Sir, how does he know our name? How does he know about the missing fleets?" Marcus continued, as if he'd heard the question. "You're wondering how we know so much about your operations. You're wondering how we could strike so precisely, so cleanly, without any of your detection systems registering an attack." The image smiled, and Krethak took an involuntary step backward. "The answer is simple. We've been inside your networks for 60 years. The lights in the command center flickered. For a moment, every display showed the same image of Marcus Chun, speaking in perfect synchronization. Every quantum communications relay you've built uses human-designed quantum entanglement matrices. Every FTL navigation system incorporates human mathematical models. Every advanced computer system in the galaxy runs on processor architectures that our ancestors developed." Krethak's communications officer was frantically checking his instruments. "Sir, the transmission is coming from inside our own computers. It's not external. It's generating from our own systems. We haven't been hiding from you." Marcus's image continued. "We've been patient. 60 years of watching you use our technology. 60 years of observing your military strategies. 60 years of learning exactly how your civilizations function, how your fleets move, how your thinking works." The Admiral grabbed his weapons officer by the shoulder. "Target every human vessel in sensor range. Full spread, maximum firepower." "Sir, there are no human vessels in sensor range. There haven't been for the past 6 hours." "That's impossible." Marcus's smile widened. "Is it? You've been looking for ships, Admiral. Metal hulls, and fusion drives, and visible weapons. But what if human military technology doesn't work the way yours does?" The tactical display began showing new contacts. But these weren't ships in any recognizable sense. They appeared to be empty space itself, areas of vacuum that somehow registered as solid objects, dark matter configurations that moved with purpose and intelligence. "What you're seeing," Marcus explained, "are spaces where reality has been adjusted. Localized field manipulations that allow matter to exist in states your science considers impossible. Ships that aren't made of matter, but of folded space itself." One of the impossible contacts moved closer to the flagship. The proximity alarms began screaming as something that wasn't there somehow prepared to fire weapons that couldn't exist. "You see, Admiral, when you have 300 million minds thinking as one, when you have the computational power of an entire civilization focused on a single problem, you can solve things that seem impossible, like how to build ships out of empty space, like how to turn gravity itself into a weapon." The first impossible ship fired. The weapon hit the flagship's shields, and the energy signatures made no sense. It wasn't plasma, wasn't particle beams, wasn't antimatter. It was something that the ship's computers couldn't identify, couldn't quantify, couldn't defend against. The shields held for exactly 3 seconds. Then, something reached through them as if they weren't there at all. The missing fleets weren't destroyed, Marcus said as the flagship systems began failing one by one. They were relocated, moved to a place where space and time work differently. They're not dead. They're simply existing in a reality that operates by human rules now. Through the command center's viewports, more impossible ships became visible. They looked like tears in space itself, like holes in the universe through which something unimaginably advanced was watching. "This is your final warning," Marcus continued. "The Galactic Council has 72 hours to rescind all measures against human space. Your fleets have 72 hours to withdraw beyond the established boundaries. Your mining operations, your trade networks, your surveillance systems, all of it ends now." Krethak tried to speak, but found that his voice wouldn't work. The air itself seemed to have changed, become thicker somehow, more resistant to sound. "If you refuse," Marcus said, "if you persist in believing that humanity is weak, that we can be intimidated or conquered or relocated like some primitive species, then you'll discover what 47 worlds thinking as one can accomplish when we stop pretending to be civilized." The transmission ended, but the impossible ships remained. They hung in space around the fleet like a swarm of holes in reality, waiting. In his private quarters aboard the flagship, Admiral Krethak tried to contact fleet headquarters. But every channel was filled with the same message, repeated endlessly in every language the galaxy knew. 71 hours, 57 minutes remaining. Across the galaxy, the same countdown appeared on every screen, every display, every communication device owned by any species that had voted to partition human space. Not just on military ships, on civilian vessels, on planetary communication networks, on personal devices in private homes. Humanity had spoken. Now, they were waiting for an answer. And, for the first time in galactic history, an entire civilization held its breath in fear of a single species' response to the word that had started it all. War. The emergency session of the full Galactic Council convened on Nexus Prime, the ancient capital world that had overseen galactic politics for 3 millennia. Representatives from 800 worlds gathered in the Great Assembly, their voices creating a cacophony of fear, anger, and desperate planning. High Chancellor Vexnara, eldest of the Cosmic Arbiters, called for order with voice amplifiers that could normally quiet the entire assembly. Today, it took nearly an hour for the panic to subside enough for discussion. "The situation is unprecedented," Vexnara announced, her ancient form wavering in the anti-gravity field that kept her functioning. "In 3,000 years of galactic governance, no single species has ever presented such a comprehensive threat to the established order." The holographic displays around the assembly showed the scope of human capabilities. 17 separate star systems had reported impossible phenomena. Fleets vanishing without trace. Gravity wells that moved independently of any celestial body. Communication networks that carried messages no one had sent. "They've turned our own infrastructure against us," reported Intelligence Coordinator Zethmal, his umbral form flickering with agitation. "Every quantum relay, every hyperspace beacon, every navigation satellite, they all carry human-designed components from decades past. We've essentially built their weapons for them." Ambassador Thexrin rose from the hegemony delegation, his mandibles clicking rapidly. "Surely this is elaborate deception. No species could hide this level of technological advancement for 60 years. Our intelligence networks would have detected. Your intelligence networks," interrupted a new voice, "have been feeding you exactly what we wanted you to see." Every head in the assembly turned toward the source of the voice. Marcus Chun stood at the center of the main floor, though no one had seen him enter. He wore the same simple diplomatic attire he'd worn for 3 years, but his presence now seemed to fill the enormous chamber. "Impossible, whispered Zephyrian Sénateur Colterrain. Security is absolute here. The transport locks alone are based on spatial manipulation technology we developed 40 years ago," Marcus said calmly. "As are your energy shields, your communication encryption, and the life support systems keeping half of you alive in this chamber." Vexnara's voice carried the weight of 3 millennia of authority. "Human, you'll explain your presence here and your species' actions immediately." Marcus walked slowly toward the central podium, his footsteps echoing in the sudden silence. "You called this session to discuss the human threat. I'm here to make sure you understand exactly what that threat is." The assembly's holographic displays flickered, and suddenly they showed not readings from across the galaxy, but images from human space itself. 47 worlds, each one revealing technology that shouldn't have been possible. Massive structures orbited each planet, not ships or stations, but geometric impossibilities that bent space around themselves. Cities that floated freely in vacuum without environmental suits. Forests growing in zero gravity, their roots extending into folded space itself. For 60 years, Marcus said, you've been watching our trade ships and calling them our fleet. You've been monitoring our civilian communications and assuming they represented our full capabilities. You've been measuring our colonies by your standards and concluding that we were primitive. The images shifted, showing the interior of one of the impossible structures. Humans walked through corridors that seemed to extend infinitely in directions that didn't exist, while others worked at consoles that appeared to be made of crystallized thought. The truth is simpler than you imagine, Marcus continued. We evolved differently. Where your species developed tools to manipulate matter, we learned to manipulate the underlying structure of reality itself. Where you built ships to travel through space, we learned to make space travel through us. Corvin delegate Zixtal's crystalline form chimed with disbelief. No species could achieve such advancement in isolation. The mathematics alone become trivial, Marcus interrupted, when you have 300 million minds working on the problem simultaneously. When every human brain is connected to every other human brain through quantum entanglement at the cellular level. The horror of the implications settled over the assembly like a physical weight. Not just a hive mind, something far more dangerous. A species that had achieved collective consciousness while retaining individual creativity and initiative. The neural web you detected, Marcus explained, isn't just our communication system. It's how we think. Every human discovery, every innovation, every tactical insight becomes part of our collective knowledge instantly. We don't just share information, we share understanding. The holographic displays now showed the countdown that had appeared across the galaxy. 68 hours, 14 minutes remaining. Your deadline approaches, Vexnara said, her voice shaking slightly. What exactly are you demanding? Marcus smiled, and the expression was both utterly human and completely alien. Complete withdrawal of all non-human presence from human space. Dissolution of the territorial reorganization decree. Recognition of human sovereignty over our established systems. Impossible d'extransnalet. The Council cannot simply... The Council, Marcus said quietly, has already demonstrated that it can make unilateral decisions about our territory. We're simply requesting that you reverse those decisions. Voluntarily. And if we refuse, demanded Senator Coldarin. Marcus gestured to the displays around them. The images changed, showing new views of human space. But now the impossible structures were moving, leaving their orbital positions and heading toward the borders of human territory. If you refuse, Marcus said, then you'll learn what happens when humans stop pretending that the laws of physics apply to us. The structures in the displays began to accelerate, but not in any way that made sense. They weren't using engines or reaction mass. They were simply deciding to be somewhere else, and reality was adjusting to accommodate their decision. We spent 60 years learning how your civilizations work, Marcus continued. We know the location of every fleet, every installation, every critical piece of infrastructure you have. We know because we helped you build it. The displays now showed tactical projections. Every major military installation in the galaxy was highlighted, with impossible ships already in position nearby. Ships that existed in the spaces between spaces, invisible to conventional sensors, but perfectly capable of affecting the physical world. The choice is simple, Marcus said. Withdraw voluntarily, and we return to our previous arrangement. Peaceful coexistence, trade relationships, diplomatic contact. Refuse. He paused, and in that moment, every being in the assembly felt something impossible. For just an instant, they could sense the vast network of human consciousness. 300 million minds thinking as one, focused on the problem of what to do with a galaxy that had threatened their survival. The sensation lasted only a heartbeat, but it was enough. In that moment, they understood what they faced. Not just advanced technology or superior tactics, but an entirely different form of existence. A species that had transcended the normal limitations of individual consciousness without losing the spark of creativity that made intelligence dangerous. If you refuse, Mark is finished. Then, you'll discover what 47 worlds can accomplish when we decide that the galaxy needs new management. The countdown continued its relentless advance. 68 hours, 10 minutes remaining. And, in the silence that followed, the greatest governing body in galactic history struggled to comprehend that they were no longer the most powerful force in the universe. That distinction now belonged to the quiet species they had so casually decided to relocate. The species that had just politely asked them to reconsider. Once, the countdown reached zero at exactly 1,400 hours, Galactic Standard Time. The Galactic Council had spent 72 hours in emergency session, debating, arguing, and ultimately failing to reach consensus. Some members advocated immediate withdrawal. Others insisted on military action. Many simply sat in stunned silence, trying to comprehend the scope of what humanity had revealed. In the end, they had voted to maintain their position. The territorial reorganization decree would stand. Human space would be partitioned and redistributed according to the needs of the greater galactic community. They made this decision believing that humanity was bluffing, that no species, regardless of technological advancement, could challenge the combined might of 800 worlds. They were wrong. The first sign that something had changed came from the hegemony's primary shipyard at Kethvala. Admiral Zrethok was reviewing defensive positions when his aide rushed into the command center, his face pale with confusion. "Sir, you need to see this. The shipyard is gone." "What do you mean, gone?" "I mean, it's not there anymore, sir. 15 minutes ago, it was a fully operational military installation with 300 ships under construction. Now, there's empty space." Admiral Zrethok rushed to the observation deck and stared out at coordinates that should have contained the largest military shipyard in the sector. Instead, he saw stars. No debris, no energy signatures, no indication that anything had ever been there. "Ow," he whispered. His aide consulted a hand scanner, his voice shaking. "According to our instruments, sir, there never was a shipyard here. The gravitational readings, the sensor logs, even the star charts, they all show this as empty space. It's as if the shipyard never existed." Similar reports began flooding in from across the galaxy. Military installations simply ceasing to exist. Not destroyed, erased from reality itself, along with all records of their existence. Fleets that had been patrolling for decades suddenly, finding themselves in empty space, their navigation computers insisting they had never had any other assignment. On Nexus Prime, High Chancellor Vexnara received report after report of impossibilities. The Corvin Military Academy, gone. The Zephyrian Fleet Command Center, gone. 300 years of accumulated military infrastructure simply edited out of existence. But it was the personal communications that truly drove home the scope of what was happening. Families receiving messages from loved ones who claimed to have always been civilians. Military officers waking up with memories of entirely different careers. Children asking why their parents had come home from jobs that had never existed. "They're not just removing our military capacity," Vexnara whispered to her aide. "They're removing the very concept of it from our history." The aide, a young luminari whose crystalline form pulsed with fear, nodded shakily. "It's worse than that, Chancellor. The disappearances are accelerating. We've lost 60% of our combined military assets in the past 6 hours. Contact the human liaison. Immediately." "Which liaison, Chancellor?" "Our records show no formal diplomatic contact with human space. According to our databases, we've never interacted with them at all." Vexnara felt something cold settle in her ancient bones. Humanity wasn't just erasing their military. They were systematically removing all evidence of the conflict itself. Soon, no one would remember the territorial reorganization decree. No one would remember the votes, the debates, the decision to partition human space. No one except the humans themselves. A new voice filled the assembly chamber, speaking from every communication device simultaneously. But this time, it wasn't Marcus Chun. It was something else entirely, a collective voice that spoke with the authority of 300 million minds thinking as one. "The Galactic Council has chosen to ignore our warning," the voice said. "You have decided that human sovereignty is negotiable, that our worlds are resources to be distributed according to your needs." Around Nexus Prime, space itself began to change. The stars were moving, rearranging themselves into new patterns. The planet's 3 moons shifted position, sliding through space without any regard for gravitational mechanics. This is your education, the collective voice continued. This is what happens when you threaten a species that has learned to treat reality as a suggestion rather than a law. The changes accelerated. On every world in the galaxy, people looked up to see skies that were subtly different. Constellations had changed. Familiar stars had moved to new positions. The fundamental backdrop of their universe had been casually rearranged by beings who apparently considered physics to be a matter of opinion. Your military installations are gone, the voice explained. Not destroyed, they never existed. We have edited them out of the timeline itself. Your weapons, your fleets, your strategic capabilities, all consigned to alternative realities where you made different choices. On the display screens throughout the assembly chamber, images began appearing. These showed the missing installations, but they existed now in a bizarre parallel space where the laws of physics operated differently. Ships designed for normal space hung motionless in environments where time moved backward. Weapons meant to destroy planets had been transformed into elaborate sculptures of crystallized energy. You still exist, the voice continued. Your civilian populations, your cultural achievements, your art and literature and science, these things have value. They will be preserved. But your ability to threaten others, to impose your will on unwilling populations, to treat entire species as resources for exploitation, this we have removed. Vexnara tried to speak, but found that her voice had no effect. The air in the chamber had been changed somehow, made unreceptive to sounds of authority or command. The human territories will remain human, the voice said. Our sovereignty is non-negotiable. But we offer you something in return, a galaxy where warfare is impossible, where conflicts must be resolved through negotiation and compromise rather than force. The implications hit the assembled delegates like a physical blow. Humanity hadn't just defended itself. It had fundamentally altered the nature of galactic civilization. Military solutions were no longer possible. The concept of conquest had been literally edited out of reality. Some of you will resist this change, the voice acknowledged. Some will attempt to rebuild what we have removed. These attempts will fail. We have placed fundamental limitations on what your species can create. You may build tools and technologies that improve life, that advance knowledge, that create beauty. But you cannot build weapons of war. Through the chamber's viewports, they could see human ships appearing throughout the system. But these weren't the impossible constructs they had seen before. These looked almost normal, sleek vessels that moved through space in conventional ways, using technologies that almost made sense. We will return to our previous role, the voice said. Quiet observers, peaceful traders, contributors to the greater galactic community. But you will remember this day. You will remember what happens when you mistake patience for weakness. Marcus Chun materialized in the center of the assembly chamber, looking exactly as he had for 3 years of diplomatic meetings. Quiet, unremarkable, easy to ignore. The territorial reorganization decree is hereby rescinded, he said simply. All measures regarding human space are void. Diplomatic relations will resume on a previous basis. He looked around the chamber, making eye contact with delegates who had spent the past 72 hours debating his species' fate. Questions? He asked politely. The silence stretched for long minutes. Finally, High Chancellor Vexnarov found her voice. Will our military capacity be restored? Marcus smiled. That depends. Have you learned anything from this experience? We have learned that humanity is not to be threatened. Good, Marcus said. That's a start. Your defensive capabilities will be restored gradually, as you demonstrate that you can be trusted with them. Offensive capability. He shrugged. Perhaps in a few centuries, when you've proven you won't use them to threaten peaceful populations. He began walking toward the chamber's exit, then paused. Oh, and one more thing. The next time you decide to partition someone else's territory, you might want to make sure they're actually as weak as they appear to be. Marcus Chun left the chamber, returning to his role as humanity's quiet liaison to the galactic community. Behind him, 800 civilizations struggled to comprehend their new reality. A universe where the most dangerous species in the galaxy had just demonstrated its power by choosing mercy over destruction. The countdown displays that had terrified the galaxy for 3 days now showed a different message. Peaceful coexistence restored. Thank you for your cooperation. And in human space, 300 million minds returned to their individual concerns, satisfied that their quiet diplomat had handled the situation with appropriate restraint. After all, they had asked nicely first.